I've been laid off in the US and in the UK, and each time it has led me to something better. In this video, I'll be sharing practical tips around how to make the most of your layoff, whether you want to take a sabbatical or go right back into the job hunt. And at the end, I'll share my story and tips for folks on a work visa who have gotten laid off abroad. There are timestamps for everything we'll cover below, so feel free to jump to the part that's most relevant for you. Hi, my name's Yuks. On this channel, we talk about travel, career, and being in your season of self-growth. I'll use this time to convince you why your layoff is another chance for you to find a new path forward that might actually suit you better. I recommend making a list of reasons why that job is not a good fit for you. And every time you're tempted to go through the highlight reel of how your life would have been if you still had that job, just revisit that list of negatives again, just to remind yourself, give yourself a reality check. What's in the past is over, it's done, and for the better. If you want to take action immediately after your layoff, it's best to be in a good state of health and mental health before you're laid off. Otherwise, you're going to spend a couple months just recovering. What can happen is that we have so much stress built into our bodies because of work that when we have that chance at freedom, we just have to take a while to lay back and recover and rest. That's why I'm a big supporter of taking a leave of absence. If you need to take a leave of absence in order to be recovered before anything happens. It takes time to recover from burnout. And if it's the company that caused your burnout, it is completely valid to take sick leave, take a leave of absence, and if you can get it paid for, paid. I can give you some tips about that. Let me comment below if you want me to talk a little bit more about getting a paid leave of absence in the US or the UK, because I've done both in both countries. Then let me know. It is really important to develop an identity outside of work. A lot of the sentiment I see around people who have experienced layoffs is they have to take a period of time to rediscover who they are. So it just shows you how important it is to have an identity outside of work, whether that's taking time after work to do some kind of hobby, learn something new. It's important to have that sense of self so that when and if you are laid off, you don't have to waste time rediscovering yourself. If you can't pursue the dream because suddenly your main source of income has been cut off, that's a different story. And that's when you should negotiate for severance. Being laid off abroad means you don't get unemployment insurance in the US, which is why severance is so important and negotiating severance is so important. I was lucky that my company offered severance, but I actually negotiated for an extra $2,000 by declining the service that is built into the severance package, which was to give recruiter services. That was something that was being offered as part of the layoff package. And I said, instead of giving me recruiter services, which I don't know how well they work, and I feel like there's a lot of other ways that I can find another job without relying on this service, why don't you give me that in cash? I was agreed on, and so I got an extra $2,000 added to my layoff because I declined the career counseling option. When you are laid off and you're on a skilled worker visa, at some point you have a grace period where you can look for another job and try to get sponsored by another employer. I'm not a fan of interviews. I feel like I don't do well on interviews. So this is my favorite method of getting a job. You can pitch yourself to other people to do some work for them, and that could potentially turn into a full-time job just through networking. That's how I landed an interim part-time job while I was looking for a full-time job that would sponsor my visa. If you start going to these networking events, you'll find that most people at these networking events are also looking for a new job. So a better position to be in is to be the one hosting networking events. If you're hosting, then you can ask and reach out to companies for them to either give you funds to host you in their space. That also could turn into its own business. But if you're the one running these events, you get to meet the most number of people while also being in that position to be asking for funding from companies. And if those companies are willing to sponsor you, you have a connection. And you also know that company is in a good enough financial spot where they can sponsor events. That tells you a little bit about how well they're doing. What I learned from this layoff is that it did something that I couldn't do. It gave me permission to pursue projects that I'd been wanting to do for a long time, but I kept putting off. What you can take from this is layoffs are an opportunity to take away excuses from you pursuing whatever passion you've been putting off. What you can do is set a list of side quests and start doing them. Document them, even if you just have a newsletter sharing what you've learned, then what you've gained. It's a great way to make sure you're making the best use of your time and also hold yourself accountable. What I did after I got laid off was I set a list of things that I wanted to do and ticked it off one by one over the months. That's part of why I started my YouTube channel, so that I could document my time unemployed and also document the different ventures that I tried, their successes, their highs, their lows, and their failure points. Monetization was not even on my mind when I started YouTube a year ago. Now that I'm a year in, I think I actually could get monetized, so I'm working very hard at that. So follow along if you want to see that journey. This is also a really good time to travel and go to countries that have been on your list for a while. I moved to a new country and got laid off. 2 years ago, I moved to London. If you watched my last video, I talk about how I made that move, but this is a year into moving to London. I had packed up my life in the US, moved to London, really settled in, had my routine going, had a 1-year lease signed when I had a phone call with HR and I learned my position had been eliminated. Well, I didn't get upset. In fact, what I felt was relief. For weeks leading up to this point, every day felt like I was in limbo, that my team might get cut, that my product might shut down, that we might pivot to something else, that we might build a new team, and every day felt like it was full of uncertainty. And that was really stressful. But now, relief. I knew what the outcome was, and what I had to think about now was, I'm laid off in a brand new country that I've moved to only a year and a half ago. What am I going to do? I have 6 months left on my lease. So I weighed my options. First thing I started doing was I started looking for a job. I started interviewing in London, but I needed a visa-sponsored job. And it felt like not only was the job market already a little bit tough, but I also had to deal with needing a company that would be willing to sponsor me. That felt like I was limited in the types of companies that I could go work for, and sometimes that meant I had to turn down chances to interview at companies that I thought were really cool and even a better fit. That 6-month period was really tough for me because I was weighing what I should do, and part of me internally really wanted to do my own thing. I really wanted to be an entrepreneur, to own something, to found something. It felt like it was time. Once I started talking to different mentors about whether or not I should keep looking for a job in the UK or follow this feeling of starting something new, every one of my mentors told me the same thing, which is cut your costs, move back home, and start your business in the US, because it is so much easier to be an entrepreneur in the US, where I have more runway because I don't have to spend money on rent if I'm living at home, and I have a lot more of a network in the US. Plus, the US has all of these friendly policies for founders that aren't as present in the UK. So all of these things really convinced me that it made more sense to be in the US. What you might find is that when you suddenly have your time opened up, you'll connect with other like-minded people who are in your same situation if you're open about it. I found so much support on YouTube. I found a lot of support even in my real life by talking to people who have done the same thing I have. They were laid off from their job and now are using their severance and savings to travel the world and figure out what their next move is. You can become a source of inspiration for them, and you can also look at their path. Find people who are 1 or 2 years out from their layoff and see what they've done. Maybe that will inspire your path too. The most important thing is how you respond. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my last video on moving abroad in order to save my job.